Van Life YouTube channel. Today we're going to talk about Starlink RV. I've been seeing a lot of articles online and a few other YouTube channels that are talking about Starlink RV. And a lot of them are talking about the specs that they're getting off the brochure or what Starlink is trying to do. We spent the summer with RV, put it through its paces, put it through a test case, and we're going to talk about that today and whether or not it's ready for van life mainstream. I just wanted to share some of the experiences that we had. So if you're thinking about Starlink RV, to help make you decide on whether or not it's right for you. Before I get too far, you really need to watch a video with Louis C.K. being interviewed by Conan. It's called Everything is Awesome and Nobody is Happy. So I wanted to preface it with that because I'm going to have some criticisms for this, but it doesn't take away that this is a piece of really amazing technology. It's just not going to be perfect for everyone, but we're going to go into that when we take a look at Starlink RV, how it works for people living out of their van. But let's talk about Starlink RV first. You probably already know what Starlink RV is, okay? Or at least you know what Starlink is, and I'm sure you've all heard of Elon Musk. Brilliant minds at SpaceX have created the Starlink system. There's about 33,000 satellites in orbit now, and they're launching new satellites almost every month. So the technology is just going to get better and better, but that's future state. This is going to come up again later because a lot of people at Starlink keep talking about what they're going to be doing, but I think it's important to know what you can currently do with the Starlink system today. Let's put this into a little bit of context in our particular use case. So I'm a contractor, I work from home, and I wanted to see if I could be mobile and keep working, which I think a lot of van lifers are trying to do. When I first heard of Starlink, I got super excited, only to find out that it only worked for fixed addresses. Well, that's changed with Starlink RV. You can now buy a package that allows you to move around the country freely, which is pretty amazing. So I was super excited. When I took a look at where we wanted to spend our summer, which just happened to be the northern part of Vancouver Island, not a lot of cell phone data coverage. So if I wanted to stay connected to the office, still connect to people on the Zoom calls, and still do my work, I needed to have a reliable, high-speed internet connection. And that's why we got Starlink RV. This is our experience. It's going to be different for everyone, by the way, and we're going to have some criticisms that might not pertain to you, but we're going to share those with you anyway, so we can all see what the Starlink RV system's about. Up until recently, Starlink was focused on residential use. Okay, your dish would only work if you were in a close proximity to your home address, and I think it was like 20 miles, 25 miles. That changed with Starlink RV. Now they allowed you to take your satellite dish out onto the road, with some caveats. You can't be moving, so you can't just mount it to the top of your car and go. It's a higher monthly cost, and we'll get into cost in a second because that is going to be a determining factor if you want to purchase Starlink RV. But you do have the opportunity to pause your subscription, which is brilliant because unless you're a 12-month-a-year van lifer, you are not going to be on the road all the time, and you don't want to be paying the high monthly subscription cost for internet that you can just as easily get on fiber from home. So, pro is that you don't have to be tethered to your house. You can turn off your subscription. Con, you can have it mounted to the top of your car and get the internet while you're driving. But that's minor. There's a higher monthly charge, but you do get to pause it. And we'll talk about costs in a minute because that's going to be a determining factor on whether or not this solution is going to be right for you. Okay, let's talk about the hardware now. This is the box the Starlink comes in, obviously. That's why it says Starlink on it. We're going to talk about the packaging a little bit later because they could make some improvements to the way that it was packaged, but that's okay. So, sturdy stand, makes sense. And here we have the dish itself. They say that you shouldn't touch the front of it. Don't. I have to let you know, when we first got the delivery and we first unpacked it, the back of the satellite dish was scuffed. And to me, it looked like they might have sent us a used dish. I checked online, and apparently a lot of other people complain about the same thing. So it actually might have something to do with their packing process, not so much that they're, refurbishing satellite dishes and sending to you. I'm not sure if they are or not. I don't know. I'm just saying that ours was scuffed. It was a bit concerning when I first got it. Hasn't really affected the use of it, so I don't really care anymore. Instructions. Basically, 3 diagrams on how to install, just as I like. This is the router. Obviously, this is going to connect together. This is what you need to be close to get the internet, obviously. Ugh! 75-foot cable. So chances are you can be pretty far away from the satellite dish in order to connect to the router, which is great. I mean, they could have skimped out. They could have given you a 10-foot cable, but they didn't. 75 foot. It's pretty good. And you can buy extenders. Like if you really, really need to put the satellite dish far away, and we're going to talk about why you might want to put the satellite dish far away later, you can do it. So not so bad. But it does come with a 75-foot cable, which for most people, it's going to be enough. I'm not sure I'd want my satellite dish farther than 75 feet away. I don't trust theirs. Anyway, let's move on to the next topic. They actually created a pretty ingenious way to put this together. Kudos to the Starlink, SpaceX, Elon, whoever is doing this. It's a pretty simple design, very intuitive. The cables go in one way. Boom. Bada bing, bada boom. Satellite is now connected. Okay, I'm gonna move this over here. Okay, so we get this in. Looking at the bottom. It's a good structure. It's a good form design. It feels very durable. It does not feel cheap because it's not cheap. This cable only goes in one way at the bottom. Brilliant. Crows, they agree. Power cord, again, they all have like rubber gaskets, just giving it that extra feeling that it is waterproof. And it is waterproof. It's weatherproof. This goes here in the bottom. Okay, we're almost set up. We haven't plugged it in actually yet, so we're not getting any power. But once we plug it into power, it's done. I mean, it's ready to go. Then we're going to connect on our phone, but physically, it's relatively easy to set up. But we do need power. So what did we do? I'm pulling out my trusty EchoFlow because this is what we used on the road. I will have a video to talk about the pros and cons of the EchoFlow later, but this is what we used on the road. I do like it. Powering that on. I know it's on because there's a little light on the router that tells me that it is now getting power. Fantastic. Once that's done, you simply go to your downloaded Starlink app on your phone, of course. We've connected to this before, so we already have our Wi-Fi name set up that you just need to connect to. So that's pretty much all there is to setting up and connecting your Starlink. Now, I would be remiss not to talk about our very first time user experience, which I can't recreate now because it's no longer our first time user experience, obviously. But the first time we set it up, I was told on my phone that the device needed to be updated. The firmware needed an update, which is pretty common for anybody who's, installing new things. Firmware updates, it's a given, especially for items that come right out of the box. However, I wasn't 100% positive that we had finished setting up when it prompted me to update the firmware. I clicked on the update firmware, and then nothing happened. And nothing happened. 30 minutes later, there was no visual indication that anything was happening with my device, and I had seriously started to panic, thinking that we had bricked our satellite dish first time out of the box. Checked the forums, and apparently some people have. Some people have had to send their devices back because they didn't work. I was already questioning because the back of the satellite was scuffed, so I thought maybe I was having serious problems. Contacted support. It was late at night. Packed everything up. The next day I came out, set it all up again, and thank God it all worked. And it has all worked since. So that was the first sort of scary experience. I would probably recommend to those who are writing the software, for people who are installing it for the very first time, do not update the firmware until you know that everything works as it should. Unless, of course, you need the firmware for it to work at all. Then, you're kind of hooped. But it was pretty scary first time user experience on the device, which I would not want to repeat for anyone. One of the big questions is, how good are the speeds coming down to the dish? And the short answer is, yeah, it's pretty good. It's not bad. You have to be careful though, and you got to curb your enthusiasm a little bit because it's not quite as good as the reports that I was reading online. So this was our experience. From a practical perspective, I needed to work on the road, which I was able to do. I was able to connect on my Zoom calls with multiple people worldwide, and they would have no idea that I wasn't in my office, except that I was very excited to show them the lake that was behind me and the forest around me, and they were all very jealous, so big success there. And that's really what it's all about, is making all your friends jealous when you're on the road. But the speeds did vary, okay? I know they're talking about speeds between 200 and 300 megabytes per second. I didn't see those speeds. They do give you a range between 50 and 200 megabytes per second in some of the literature, and some of the people are talking about it. On average, I was getting between 40 and 60 megabytes per second. And when you're in the middle of nowhere and you're a billion miles away from the closest cell tower, and you really did want to watch Netflix, it was great. It worked really, really well. But it wasn't the high speeds that people were talking about. It might get there someday, and I hope that it does, but for me, that was about the average speed. If you need faster than that, this might not work for you, okay? But I wasn't complaining. I have to admit, one time I did connect, I checked the speed, I was getting 185 megabytes per second, which just blew me away, but that was once, and that was only for a moment. The speed does fluctuate. If you go into an urban center with this and try to connect where you're competing for network space with everybody around you, speeds are going to drop and lower. It's not a fixed amount. So you are dependent on how many people are accessing the system at any given time. So just keep that in mind. I know that SpaceX is working on faster speeds. I know that they're promising a more reliable speed over 100 megabytes per second. I'm sure they'll do it, but it's not happening today. Another thing to keep in mind is that there's no data cap. As far as I can tell, it's unlimited bandwidth. So download till your heart's content, binge on that Netflix or Prime, surf whatever content makes you happy. Let me talk though about a big drawback to the system, since we're talking about connection, and that's its requirement for open sky. Okay, I get it, it's a satellite dish, it needs open sky, it needs line of sight to the satellites, but we were traveling in a rainforest. And I'm not sure if anybody actually has traveled through the British Columbia or backpacked or boondocked through British Columbia. 9 out of 10 times, you're going to be surrounded by trees. You're going to have tree coverage, and that was a problem. If you are in the middle of the prairies, if you're driving through Arizona, awesome. Okay, you're going to have wide open skies all the time consistently. But if you're going into an area where you're not consistently going to have access to unobstructed sky, this is going to be a problem for you as well. So keep that in mind. Think about where you're going and what you're going to need it for, because it's not always going to work. And if you are getting yourself in a situation where you have to have 100% reliability to access high-speed internet all the time, this is going to cause you some problems, okay? So be aware of that. And the app will help you tell you if you're in unobstructed sky. I know that sounds weird, but there's an app, you fly around, it's very, very cool. If there's a tree just slightly hanging over, it's going to tell you to find a better place. You can still probably get around it, but just note that if you are going into the forest where there's a lot of tree overhang, it's not going to work that well. We need to talk about the cost of this system because it's not cheap, okay? We'll go over the numbers in a second, but it's going to be different for everybody. Some people are going to make room for this in their budget. Some people, this is just going to be completely out of their budget. If this was an always-on system that also didn't require a lot of storage or setting up and tearing down, it might even be worth more, but it is a pretty heavy price tag for what you're getting. So let's talk about the cost. I'm based out of Vancouver, Canada, so I'm going to talk about some Canadian prices. I'm going to throw up some American prices as well, but I'm also going to show what the prices are after tax, because people are forgetting about that. So you buy the hardware outright, okay? So the hardware in Canada is going to cost you $760. In the US, that's about $600. And there's no contract commitments, which is awesome. So you're not renting or leasing this hardware, you own it. The monthly subscription cost for the RV package is $170 Canadian a month for each month that you're using it. Now you can pause that, which is great, but for every month that you're using it, even if you're using it just for one day, you're spending $170 Canadian. In the States, that's $135, okay? Maybe that's completely affordable for you. I found it a little bit steep, but again, not to take away from how badass this technology is, it's still an expensive solution. But you can't ignore the tax, because that's where it gets a little bit even more dicey. In Canada, this system cost me $922.88, so close to $1,000 just for the hardware, okay? Now that monthly fee goes from $170 to $190.40 a month, so close to $200 a month for high-speed internet access that you're not using to the same extent as if you were at home on your fiber, on your cable, on your DSL or whatever. It's not an always-on solution. That's a pretty heavy price tag that you have to take into consideration before you buy this system. Another drawback to the system is the power consumption. Now, when you're at home or you have hookups at your campsite where there is power, you're not thinking about power. But when you're boondocking, and I know for you van lifers, you're thinking about how much does every device consume your battery. Now, I mentioned that we have the EcoFlow. It's a 1300, okay? Which means it has, the easy math is 1300 watt hours, okay, available in this system. I know that other people with other vans, they might have multiple deep cycle batteries, which might give them more. Some people have smaller battery systems, but let's just, how does this work? And what does this consume? Okay, if we had an appliance that was consuming 100 watts per hour, this could charge it for 13 hours. I mean, that's simple math. I think an iPhone is about 5 watt hours. So what would 5 watt hours be? 260 hours of iPhone charging time. This takes about 40 watt per hour. That's 32 hours of sweet, sweet, beautiful internet, which isn't too bad. So, but 32 hours, and I'm out of power. So I needed another power source. But let's talk about what else you're powering. We also had a fridge. Now, draw of 40 watts per hour is quite a bit, considering our fridge is about 36 to 40 watt hours as well. So it's on par with a fridge, which was by far our highest consuming appliance until this. So now we need to keep our stuff cold, we need our beer cold, but we want the internet. So now you've got this drawing 40, that drawing 36 or what have you. Let's just round that up to 40 as well. That's 80 watts per hour. Suddenly that, that 32 hours of sweet, sweet internet time is just dropped considerably. Let's not even think about the fridge. Like you're saying, no, I don't need a fridge. I've got a cooler. I'm going to put in some ice. Awesome. Probably a smart way to go. However, you're going to have to charge your laptop. My MacBook Pro takes 80 watts per hour to charge. All right. So that's 80 plus 40, 120. Okay. I didn't think there was going to be any math in this YouTube video, but now you're getting into this thing only will keep it going for hours, not days. And if you've been van lifing for a while and you have boondocked in the past, I know you're always thinking about what is consuming power. Sadly, this is going to consume a lot of power. If you're at a place where there is a constant stream of power, chances are they also have cell phone range, cell phone coverage and data coverage. So it's going to be easier half the time just to pull out your phone and tether it to your laptop than it is to pull this out of the box, set it up, connect it, monitor your power consumption, and then turn it off every time you've stopped browsing. But I know what you're saying. You're going, but Paul, I'm going to have my solar panels. Hey, awesome. You should bring solar panels. You'd be a fool not to bring solar panels, especially if you're relying on these types of batteries. They work so well together. We had solar. But again, it depends on where you're going to be. Are you going to be in Arizona in the desert when the sun's shining? Solar is only going to get you so far. We had solar panels up for a while, and it was break even. We were bringing in as much power as we were consuming, which was great, but we weren't building up the battery base. The last thing I want to talk about is the consumption of space. Okay, this isn't a small item. This actually is fairly chunky. The box it comes in, sadly, relatively cheap cardboard, not good for storing. You need something a little bit durable. We put everything in this. All right, we packed everything into the Starlink box, then we packed it into the plastic container, and then we stored it on top of the van, okay? Because, hell, this was not going to go inside the van. As much as I love technology, as much as I love staying online and watching cat videos, there was just no room inside the van for the satellite dish. So the form factor is really big and it's really bulky. Now, if you've got a VW van, you're going to have the same problem. We're driving around in a couple Delicas. Those aren't big vans. But again, if you're one of those people who are driving in a motorhome that feels like a Hilton, maybe you have room. We certainly did not. So it was very challenging for us. In fact, because it was up in an awkward spot on top of the van, there were some days where we're like, do you want to bring down the Starlink? And we'd be like, it's a lot of work. Let's just leave it up there. Because every time you brought it down and unpacked it, you know that after a few hours, you just have to pack it all up, put it back in the box, and get it up on top of the van. Which is unfortunate because we would have liked to use it more, but damn, it was a lot of work. So unless you have vast amounts of space for it, you have to keep that into consideration. In summary, let's talk about the pros very quickly. The tech is incredibly cool. I love it. The first time it turned on and this head starts to spin, I literally got goosebumps. I thought I was in the future. So excited. But that honeymoon feeling does wear off. But at first it was shivers. It was amazing. That initial firmware update sort of threw me for a bit of a loop and I panicked and I thought I had broken the machine. But you know what? Once that was done, it's consistently setting up really quick every time. I think on the phone it tells you it takes about 15 minutes to make a connection. I was getting a connection in 2, 3, 4 minutes to the sky, to the satellites in the sky, and it worked great. I mean, seriously, in 5 minutes I was surfing the internet. Very rarely did I have a connection problem. There was one time we lost access to our router, but after a few minutes of troubleshooting, we got it working again. And like I said, when it was up, it was amazing. Also, when we found open sky, it was amazing. But you're not always going to find open sky, which gets into some of our cons. You have to have open sky, which is kind of brutal. I should say that open sky does mean it can be cloudy. When we're talking about obstructions, clouds are not obstructions, planes are not obstructions. We're talking about trees. Buildings are obstructions. The space limiting, which I just talked about, very, very challenging. And then the power consumption is a little bit high. You have to monitor every watt that you're spending. And I know Starlink has come and said they're working on a low energy model. I'd love to see it someday, but right now, unless you've got a lot of power, this might not work for you. So that's about it, really. Oh, the cost. Some people are going to find the cost really high. Some people are going to find it not high enough. I don't know. I found it a bit high, but then again, I don't make a lot of money. This is what we saw from Starlink. Again, I've seen a lot of really good videos to talk about all of its features, but it sounds like they're literally reading from a brochure. I really wanted to bring the perspective of somebody who's actually had to use it in the real world. It did pass our tests. I was able to stay connected. I was able to work. I got onto those Zoom calls. It did what I needed it to do, but we probably used it 10% as much as I thought I was going to use it. I thought we were going to stay connected all the time. We weren't. Didn't have the power. Didn't have the lack of coverage, but when it worked great. So it's going to be perfect for some people and not for others. If you're still watching, thanks, and see you next time.